トビデオ
A recurring topic we have on this series is the 80s as this golden age for anime. I mean, it was the first thing I talked about in my very first video. But I don't think I've gone into the nitty-gritty as to why that decade was such a fertile ground that allowed the anime industry to build on the foundations set by its forebearers. After World War II, the United States, through the Marshall Plan, spent a good 10 years occupying Japan, mostly as a means to keep the nation that was now war-torn, destitute, and full of very unhappy and demoralized people from falling under the influence of the Soviet Union. During this occupation, coalitions of Japanese bankers, distributors, suppliers, and manufacturers called keiretsus began to form. The keiretsus, along with strong workers' unions and good relations with government officials, formed the basis of what would become the Japanese economic miracle. After weathering what would have been a devastating recession in the mid-50s after the occupation ended, Japan's economy began a rapid growth. A combination of heavy industrialization, the formation of the keiretsus, and the Korean War made Japan a manufacturing powerhouse for most of the 60s. This in turn led to a significant improvement in the quality of living standards for the average Japanese citizen. All of a sudden, the demands of the populace shifted from basic needs such as food and clothing to more recreational goods such as cars, furniture, and consumer electronics. The Japanese manufacturing industry shifted their business to meet those needs, but not of just their own people. Japan's booming economy was based on their exports, and thanks to the zaibatsus, or corporations, of Japan's devotion to quality control, cost reductions, innovation, and constant desire to improve their products, Japan was able to dominate the world in the manufacturing of vehicles and technology, thus cementing the country as one of the biggest economic powerhouses of the world by the late 70s, a fact that made another economic powerhouse with more inferior products very jealous.
The car you're looking at, a 78 Toyota Corolla, donated by Hoot McInerney in Oak Park. We've got Tim Donovan here taking his frustrations out on this 78 Toyota.
To make a long, if incredibly simplified story short, the constant 30-year economic growth and advancements in consumer goods meant that the 80s was a golden age for Japanese society as a whole. And of course, the anime of the time reflected that. Some anime, set in the then modern day, chose to immerse itself in the Japanese era of good feelings, setting its stories amongst the Tokyo nightlife and capturing the unfettered optimism of the culture as seen in anime like Toy, Cypher, Bobby's and Deep, and even Call Me Tonight if you ignore all the monsters. But for this video, I want to talk about the anime that I feel is the biggest celebration of 80s Japan. An anime that, even watching it as an American in 2020, makes it feel like that you are there in Tokyo enjoying the fruits of the Japanese asset price bubble. Nineteen19, not to be confused for a different 1919, is a long out-of-print OVA that never got a release stateside nor even found a DVD release. And it's a shame because if you love the 80s anime aesthetic, this anime right here is required viewing. I've seen many fellow content creators try to pinpoint what they think is the most 80s anime ever, mostly titles such as California Crisis and the aforementioned Cypher, an anime that literally has a montage in it set to Let's Hear It for the Boy. But I want everyone to know that I have found it. I have found the true embodiment of the 80s in anime form, and its name is 1919. Produced by Studio Madhouse and directed by Full Metal Panic's own Koichi Chigira, 1919 is 1980s Japan at its most romantic and glamorous. This is the anime that I feel like comes the closest in capturing the feeling of living amongst the Tokyo nightlife. And on top of that, the OVA itself isn't that bad. So let's take a look at this alluring throwback to the slick, urbane 80s and see why it's the best, most 80s anime out of all the most 80s anime. Now I'm going to mix things up a bit here and talk about the overall story of 1919 first. Based off a 12-volume manga that ran in the seinen magazine Young Jump, 1919 focuses on Kazushi Kubota, a student at the tail end of his high school years, or maybe he's already graduated, we don't exactly see him in school outside of flashbacks, and is appropriately at the age of 19. And like most people his age, he is currently finding his life at a crossroads. While he does have a supportive circle of friends and a stable job at a bakery, he still feels directionless going forward in his life. He also has not had a girlfriend at any point in his young life. So with that, Kubota feels like the best way to finally enter manhood and have a more focused direction on his path in life is to lose his virginity.
What exactly does third base feel like? Warm apple pie.
Now I know what everyone's thinking, and let me assure you that this premise is handled with a lot more maturity and grace than you would expect. You see, Kubota doesn't just want to lose his virginity to just any girl, he views his transition from cherry boyhood to manhood as an important moment in his life. As such, he wants that moment to be shared with a girl he loves and hopes to spend the rest of his life with. And in this OVA, he ends up running into Masana Fujisaki, an old high school classmate that he harbored an intense, unrequited crush for. The two of them end up catching up on things, and Kubota finds out that Fujisaki has broken up with her boyfriend. So a conversation turns into gaining a phone number, which turns into a request to go on a date, which in turn leads to slow burn romance feels. And the question becomes, is Fujisaki going to be the one? For a series where the core conceit is, will this dude finally cash in the old V card, the whole genre of the OVA is less obnoxious sex comedy and more just straight up romance. Sure, there are comedic moments like Kubota constantly being sexually harassed at his workplace by his male boss.
和志、昼食も取らずに調理場で何遊んでるのかな？
そう言いながらケツ触んのやめてください、店長。
Okay, but to be fair, there are some truly funny gags.
実は、あれを、用意してなくって。
あれっていうのはもしかして、これのことかな？
Those gags are ultimately rare in this anime. For the most part, it's a very introspective romance, mostly focusing on Kubota's own thoughts as he finds himself wooing this girl he's been harboring a crush on for years and only now begins to reciprocate his feelings. Sometimes you just gotta appreciate a good slow burn romance. Deep, long conversation about the loves of the past. Flashback to younger days to help put things in perspective. It's all it means to make moments like these burn twice as bright. It's even better when you know Kubota is not using Fujisaki as a means to an end to lose his maiden status. He is madly in love with Fujisaki, and the fact that she appears to return his feelings is honestly something he cannot wrap his head around. It's a dynamic that leads to some incredibly good moments, like when the two of them wind up at a love hotel after spending the whole day together. Fujisaki is in the bed wearing nothing but a towel and is ready to roll, but poor Kubota's mind is going a mile a minute wondering if they're moving too fast.
いいのよ。初めてなんだから気にすることないのよ。ああ、まったくもう早いんだから。これだから童貞って困るのよね。
どうしよう。
It's like that scene from Beastars, only with less gore. But even with all the passionate romance on display throughout this anime, it's still very much grounded in reality. Romances are rarely this easy, and there is bound to be some drama, ultimately leading to a very bittersweet conclusion. And to answer your question if Kubota loses his virginity in this OVA, well...
Premarital sex is a sin. Have fun rotting in hell, Beth.
No, just kidding. It's nothing like that. But it does lead to a moment that is far more realistic and with less fanfare than Kubota was expecting, and I dare not spoil it here. But enough about the narrative, let's talk about what I really want to talk about in this anime. The visuals. You want to talk about 80s aesthetic? This OVA is awash in it. The entire stylistic philosophy of 1919 is to draw from all the popular imagery seen in everyday life, from billboards to commercials to album covers, and stir them all into this 80s pop art stew. And the result is an anime that is a perfect snapshot of Japan's decade of opulence. We talked about a similar aesthetic being utilized in the anime Toy. Unsurprisingly, both anime share animation director and character designer in Naoyuki Onda. But in retrospect, it seems like Toy was just a trial run for the type of direction that Naoyuki Onda wanted to do for 1919. I talked about how Ondo took a lot of cues from music videos in Toy, but that mostly just extended to the anime cinematography. In 1919, however, he's far more ambitious in not just how he frames his shots, but also how he stylizes those shots. For instance, here's how he frames an awkward, tense moment between Kubota, Fujisaki, and Fujisaki's ex.
Kazuya.
Then there's the montages, which is where the aesthetics really shine. The stylization appears to be drawing more from popular music videos that burn themselves into popular consciousness via their memorable visuals. These montages feel like album art coming to life, and just helps bring the upbeat mood of young love in the 80s. But then there's also the art direction by Madhouse luminary Yuji Ikeda. Unlike Toei Shinichiro Kobayashi's clean artistry, Ikeda's backgrounds are focused on intense yet detailed lighting. It's rare when you pay attention to the lighting of anime, unless it's bad, but Ikeda's use of lighting really helps create this hazy atmosphere of the Tokyo nightlife. A bright discotheque is colored in a way that emphasizes the setting shadows, which helps underscore Kubota's loneliness. Or when it looks like Kubota and Fujisaki are about to consummate their relationship in the Love Hotel, the lighting becomes saturated in these warm, heavy reds to better suit the hot and heavy atmosphere. But if you ask me, all of these super 80s pop art visuals would not let the anime resonate as a snapshot of its time period if it wasn't for its strong soundtrack. And I hope you all will bear with me here as I talk about the musical genre known as city pop. If Japan's economic boom of the 1980s had a soundtrack, it was the music known as city pop. The sound of city pop is said to have begun in the mid-70s, when Yellow Magic Orchestra frontman Harumi Hosono founded the band Tin Pan Alley, which was sort of a jazz fusion band that took cues from Southern American soul-style music and the tropical melodies of Hawaii and Okinawa. Though the band itself did not last very long, they did end up being a powerful influence on this guy, Tatsuro Yamashita. Yamashita had been the frontman for the successful yet short-lived band Sugar Babe, who mostly did Steely Band / Doobie Brothers inspired AOR music. Since the breakup of Sugar Babe in 1976, Yamashita had been doing solo work with limited success, until he took the stylings of Hosono's group and mixed it with his slick yacht rock sound. And the result was Right on Time, an album that went #1 in 1980 and helped codify the sound of the decade, earning Yamashita the title of the King of City Pop. Combined with the tech boom of the decade, which introduced instruments such as the Yamaha CS80 and the TR-808 drum machine, city pop became the default sound of the 80s. But the genre was less defined by the sound than by the feeling it produced. John Bilstein of Rolling Stone said of the genre that city pop was less a strict genre term than a broad vibe classification. While Japanese music historian Yosuke Kitazawa said that city pop was music made by city people for city people. And indeed, the sound of city pop is surprisingly broad, ranging from hot summery funk instrumentals to smooth, jazzy pop ballads. And of course, the music that was the soundtrack for Japan in the 80s did find its way in a lot of anime, both in sound and in imagery. But if there was an anime that you could call city pop the anime, it's 1919. I've heard people call 1919 less of an anime and more of a music video compilation separated by strings of dialogue, and yeah, I could see that. I mean, they don't use the entire songs like Interstellar 4-5, but the music of 1919 feels like an ever-present, important element. It helps with both the general feel and tone of the anime, while also placing it permanently in time. Going back to Toy, what pop punk was to that anime, city pop is to 1919. For instance, the montages between Kubota and Fujisaki are set to these glamorous poppy jams about how awesome it is to be in love. It fits the mood and plays along with the pop art imagery. But there's moments where the soundtrack can choose to have its poppy soundtrack be a little ironic. In the scene where Kubota is sulking in the club about how he's unlucky in love, his brooding is undercut by a high energy bop about how much the female singer loves boys. But what really makes 1919 City Pop the anime is the fact that Madhouse was able to use songs from City Pop legend Toshiki Katamatsu. Not only do they have Katamatsu do the opening theme, which is a catchy summertime ditty about youth reflecting the entire main theme of the anime, but he also gets the song that's played at the emotional climax of the anime, which is this heart-rending romantic ballad that totally makes the final scene of the anime. So all in all, from the sound to the visuals, 1919 is a perfect snapshot of the 80s. The entire aesthetic and mood of an opulent decade all wrapped up neatly and nicely in a bittersweet romance. It is the most 80s anime out of all 80s anime, especially given its release date of July 27th, 1990. What the hell?
Hiya, Toonsters! Welcome to the 90s!
Wait, hold on. This still works. Despite 1919 being technically a 90s anime, it still should be considered an 80s anime, because 1990 in Japan is basically the peak for the 80s economic boom. After that comes recession, the lost decade, and even more tragically, City Pop going out of style. So on top of being a bittersweet tale of romance, 1919 is also bittersweet in a more metatextual sense. It's a snapshot of a glorious, fun-loving consumerist 80s right at the tail end of that time period. It's the last gasp of 80s anime. And that is why I think it's the most 80s out of all the 80s anime. It's 80s anime's grand finale, the whole aesthetic basing itself around the attitudes, moods, and music of that time distilled into its purest form, sliding underneath a closing door that's about to shut forever. If you have any interest in 80s anime, 80s aesthetic, or especially City Pop since that's making a huge comeback, then 1919 is required viewing. The story itself is good, but its arresting visuals will just hypnotize you in a way that could have only been done in the 80s. Just flawless proof as to why people are so drawn to this decade and its gorgeous artistry.